Okay, so part 5, A New Life Far From Home, and that takes us to chapter 24, which is on page 133, it looks like. Page 133. Hi, Erin. I'm recording for anyone who's not here. So go ahead and make sure you have your reading log open. We're on page 24, or chapter 24, page 133. Okay. Let me type that into chat. Okay. A place called Birmingham. I woke up on 16 October to a lot of people standing around looking at me. They all had 4 eyes, 2 noses, and 2 mouths. I blinked, but it did no good. I was seeing everything in double. The first thing I thought was, thank God I'm not dead. But I had no idea where I was or who these people were. So remember, her bus was attacked. Do you guys remember that? Her bus was attacked and she just remembers kind of going black. They were speaking English, although they all seemed to be from different countries. I tried to talk since I could speak English, but no sound came out. There seemed to be a tube of some kind in my throat, a tube that had stolen my voice. I was in a high bed, and all around me, complicated machines beeped and purred. I understood then. I was in a hospital. My heart clenched in panic. If I was in a hospital, where were my parents? Was my father hurt? Was he alive? Something had happened to me. I knew, but I was sure something had happened to my father as well. So do you guys remember what happened to her on the bus? Why she blacked out?
Wasn't she attacked by somebody?
She was attacked and she heard gunshots and she blacked out. So we can assume that maybe she was shot. A nice woman wearing a headscarf came to my side. She told me that her name was Renana and she was the Muslim chaplain. She began to pray in Urdu. Instantly, I felt calm, comforted, and safe. As I listened to the beautiful, soothing words of the Holy Quran, I closed my eyes and drifted off. When I opened my eyes next, I saw that I was in a green room with no windows and very bright lights. The nice Muslim woman was gone. A doctor and nurse were in her place. The doctor spoke to me in Urdu. His voice was oddly muffled, as if he were speaking from a great distance. He told me that I was safe and that he had brought me from Pakistan. I tried to talk, but I couldn't. So I tried to trace letters on my hand, thinking I could spell out a question. The nurse left and came back with a piece of paper and a pen for me, but I couldn't write properly. I wanted to give them my father's number. I wanted to write a question, but everything came out all jumbled. So the nurse wrote the alphabet on a piece of paper and I pointed at letters. The first word I spelled out was father, then country. Where was my father? I wanted to know. And what country was this? The doctor's voice was still hard to hear, but he seemed to be saying I was in a place called Birmingham. I didn't know where that was. Only later did I figure it out. It was England. He hadn't said anything about my father. Why not? Something had happened to him. That was the only reason there could be. It had in my head that this doctor had found me on the roadside and that he didn't know my father was also hurt, or that he didn't know how to find my father. I wanted to give him my father's phone number so he could tell him, your daughter is here. I moved ever so slightly to spell out father again, and a blinding pain cut through my head. It was as if 100 razors were inside my skull, clattering and rattling around. I tried to breathe. Then the nurse leaned down and dabbed my left ear with a piece of gauze, and blood came away on the cloth. My ear was bleeding. What did that mean? I tried to lift my hand to touch it, but I noticed, as if from a distance, that my hand did not seem to be working properly. What had happened to me? Nurses and doctors came in and out, No one told me anything. Instead, they asked me questions. I nodded and shook my head in reply. They asked if I knew my name. I nodded. They asked if I could move my left hand. I shook my head. They had so many questions, and yet they wouldn't answer mine. It was all too much. The questions, the pain in my head, the worry about my father. When I closed my eyes, I didn't see darkness, only a bright light, as if the sun were shining under my eyelids. I was fading in and out, but I never felt as if I had slept. There was only long stretches of being awake, my head filled with pain and questions, and then not. The room I was in, the ICU, and didn't have any windows, so I never knew if it was day or night. I knew only that no one had answered my constant question, where was my father? But eventually, a new question joined it when I looked around the room at all the complicated medical equipment. Who would pay for this? A lady walked in and told me her name was Dr. Fiona Reynolds. She spoke to me as if we were old friends. She handed me a green teddy bear, which I thought was an odd color for it, and a pink notebook. The first thing I wrote was thank you. Then I wrote, why I have no father. And my father has no money. Who will pay for this? Your father is safe, she said. He is in Pakistan. Don't worry about the payment. My father was safe. Why wasn't he here? And where was my mother? I had more questions for Dr. Fiona, but the words I needed would not come to my mind. She seemed to understand. Something bad happened to you, she said, but you're safe now. What had happened? I tried to remember. All sorts of images floated through my head. I didn't know what was real and what was a dream. I am on a bus with my father, and two men shoot us. I see a crowd gathered around me as I lie on a bed or maybe a stretcher. I can't see my father, and I'm trying to cry out. Where is Abba? Where's my father? But I can't speak. And then I see him and I feel joy and relief. I feel someone hovering over me, a man whose hands are poised above my neck, ready to choke me. I am on a stretcher and my father is reaching out to me. I am trying to wake up to go to school, but I can't. Then I see my school and my friends and I can't reach them. I see a man in black pointing a gun at me. I see doctors trying to stick a tube in my throat. I'm telling myself, you are dead. But then I realize that the angel has not yet come to ask the question a Muslim hears after death. Who is your God? Who is your prophet? I realize then I can't be dead, and I fight and I struggle and kick and try to wake from this terrible nightmare. These images seem very real, yet I knew they couldn't all be. But somehow I ended up in this place called Birmingham, in a room full of machines, with only the green teddy bear at my side. And that ends on page 136. You want to put that in there, 136. I'll pause for a minute. Okay, chapter 25, page 137. Problems.
Do we have to go to like a certain link?
You should be doing your reading log, yeah?
Okay.
You have your reading log open?
No.
That's why we pause.
You have the. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So you should have that open.
You want to go on a medal?
And then you're putting in the chapter and the page number. So chapter 25, page 137, problem solutions. In those first days of being in the hospital, my mind drifted in and out of a dream world. I thought I had been shot, but I wasn't sure. Were those dreams or memories? I couldn't remember words either. I wrote to the nurses asking for a wire to clean my teeth. I had a pounding, nonstop headache. I was seeing double. I could hardly hear. I couldn't move my left arm or close my left eye. But for some reason, all I wanted to do was floss my teeth. Your teeth are fine, the doctor said, but your tongue has gone numb. I tried to shake my head. No, I wanted to explain. There was something stuck in my teeth. But shaking my head set off razor blade pain, so I held still. I couldn't convince them, and they couldn't convince me. Then I saw that my green teddy bear was gone. A white one had taken its place. I felt a special affection for the green teddy bear since he was by my side that first day. He helped me. I took the notebook and wrote, "Where's the green teddy?" No one gave me the answer I wanted. They said it was the same teddy that had been by my side the first day. The lights and walls had given him a green glow. The teddy was white, they said. He was always white. Meanwhile, the bright lights in my room were excruciating, like hot white daggers to my eyes, especially my poor left eye, which wouldn't close. "Stop lights," I begged in my notebook. The nurses did their best to darken the room, but as soon as I got some relief from the pain, my thoughts circled back to my father. My father, I wrote again in the notebook, when you can't move, you can't hear, and you can't see properly, your mind spins and spins, and my mind kept going back to the same question, where was my father? Every time a different doctor or nurse came into my room to change my blanket or check my eyesight, I handed them the notebook and pointed to the questions about my father. They all said not to worry. But I did worry. I couldn't stop. I was also obsessed with how we would pay for all this. Whenever I saw the doctors and nurses talking to each other, I thought for sure that they were saying, Malala doesn't have any money. Malala can't pay for her treatment. There was one doctor who always looked sad, so I wrote him a note. "Why are you sad?" I asked. I thought it was because he knew I couldn't pay, but he replied, "I'm not sad." "Who will pay?" I wrote. "We don't have any money." "Don't worry, your government will pay," he said. After that, he always smiled when he saw me. Then a new worry seized me. Did my parents know where I was? Maybe they were wandering the streets and alleys of Mingora looking for me. But I am a hopeful person, and therefore, when I see problems, I will always think about solutions. So I thought I would go to the hospital's reception desk and ask for a phone so I could call my parents. But I realized I didn't have the money to pay such an expensive call. I didn't even know how to dial Pakistan from here. Then I thought, I need to go out and start working to earn money so I can buy a phone and call my family so we can all be together again. Dr. Fiona came into my room and handed me a newspaper clipping. It was a picture of my father standing next to the Pakistan Army's chief of staff. My father was alive, and in the background of the photo was Atal. I smiled. Something bad had happened to me, but I was alive, and now I knew my father was alive. That was a reason to be thankful. Then I noticed a figure in a shawl sitting in the back of the photo near my brother. I could just make out her feet. Those were my mother's feet. "That's my mother," I wrote to Dr. Fiona. That night, I slept a bit better. It was a sleep full of strange dreams, dreams of being on a bed surrounded by lots of people, dreams of being shot, dreams of a bomb exploding. I would wake up and look around for the green teddy, but always it was just the white one. Now that I knew my family was safe, I spent all my time worrying about how we would pay for my treatment. Obviously, my father was at home because he was selling our few possessions to pay for all this. Our house was rented, the school building was too. Even if he sold everything we owned, it would never be enough. Was he borrowing money? Was he calling on his friends to ask for a loan? Later that day, the man who had spoken to me in Urdu, Dr. Javid Kayani, came in with his cell phone. "We're going to call your parents," he said matter-of-factly. I couldn't believe it. "You won't cry," he said firmly. "You won't weep. You will be strong. We don't want your family to worry." I nodded. I hadn't cried once since I'd arrived. My left eye was constantly weeping, but I had not cried. In a series of blips and beeps, I heard my father's dear and familiar voice. "Yanni," he said. "How are you feeling, my Yanni?" I couldn't reply because of the tube in my throat, and I couldn't smile because my face was numb, but I was smiling inside, and I knew my father knew that. "I'll come soon," my father said. "Now, have a rest, and in 2 days we will be there." His voice was loud and bright, maybe a little too bright. Then I realized he had also been told not to cry. Okay, and that ended on page 141. Okay, so chapter 26, 100 questions, page 143. I wrote a new note in my pink diary, mirror, when I got my wish and the nurses brought me a small white mirror. I was surprised at what I saw. Half my head was shaved and my long hair was gone. Stitches dotted my left brow. A large purple and yellow bruise surrounded my left eye. My face was swollen the size of a melon, and the left corner of my mouth turned down in a frown. Who was this poor, distorted Malala? And what had happened to her? I was confused, but I wasn't upset, just curious, and I didn't know how to express what I was feeling. Now my hair is small, was all I could write. Had the Taliban shaved my head? I wondered. Who did this to me? I wrote my letters scrambled. What happened to me? Dr. Fiona said what she always said. Something bad happened to you, but you are safe. But this time it wasn't enough. I pointed at my words. Was I shot? I wrote. I couldn't move the pencil fast enough to keep up with my questions. Had anyone else been hurt? I wondered. Had there been a bomb? I was getting frustrated with my sore head and my bad memory and the tube that was preventing me from talking. I started to squirm. I'd get out of here and find a computer so I could check my email and ask someone what happened. I saw the cell phone on Dr. Fiona's belt and signaled to her I wanted it. I mimed dialing on my palm, then brought the phone to my ear. Dr. Fiona placed a gentle hand on my wrist and sighed. Then she spoke very slowly and calmly. You were shot, she said, on the bus, on your way home from school. So they did it, I thought. The Taliban really did what they said they would do. I was furious. Not that they shot me, that I hadn't had a chance to talk to them. No, they'd never hear what I had to say. 2 other girls were hurt, Dr. Fiona said, but they're all right. Shazia and Kainat. I didn't recognize these names, or if I did, I couldn't remember who these girls were. She explained that the bullet had grazed my temple near my left eye and traveled 18 inches down to my left shoulder where it stopped. It could have taken out my eye or gone into my brain, she said. It's a miracle you're alive. I tried to speak, but remembered I couldn't. I took the mirror and pointed to a splatter of black dots near my temple. Dr. Fiona grimaced slightly. Gunpowder. I lifted my hand and showed her more black dots on the fingers of my left hand. That's gunpowder too, she said. You must have lifted your hand to cover your face at the last minute. I will admit, I used to be sensitive about my looks. I was never satisfied. My nose was too big. I had funny black spots on my face. My skin was too dark. Even my toes were too long. But I looked at this Malala in the mirror with nothing but curiosity. I was like a scientist studying a specimen. I wanted to understand exactly what had happened, where the bullet went, what exactly it had done. I was fascinated by what I saw. I wasn't sad. I wasn't scared. I just thought, it doesn't matter what I look like. I'm alive. I was thankful. I glanced over at Dr. Fiona. She had positioned a box of tissues between us, and I realized then that she'd been expecting me to cry. Maybe the old Malala would have cried. But when you nearly lost your life, a funny face in a mirror is simply proof that you are still here on this earth. I just wanted to learn more about what that bullet had done. Had it passed through my brain? Was that why I couldn't hear properly? Why couldn't I shut my left eye? And what does this have anything to do with what's going on with my left arm? I had 100 questions for Dr. Fiona, but I asked only one. How soon can I go home? So chapter 27, Passing the Hours, that's page 145. One day, another Fiona came to my room. Her name was Fiona Alexander, and she said she was the head of communications for the hospital. I thought this was funny. I couldn't imagine the hospital in SWAT having a communications office. She said the hospital would like to take a picture of me. I thought this was really funny. Why would anyone want a photo of me looking the way I did? Would it be okay to take my picture? Fiona asked again. I didn't see the point of a picture of me with my swollen face in a hospital bed, but everyone here was so nice, and I wanted to be nice in return. And I thought maybe my parents would see a picture of me, and this would give them hope and bring them to me faster. I agreed, but I made 2 demands. I asked for a shawl so I could cover my hair, and I asked her to please take the picture from my right side. The left side of my face still would not cooperate. The worst thing about being in the hospital was the boredom. While I waited for my family, I stared at the clock in my room. The movement of the hands around the dial reassured me that I was indeed alive and helped me measure off the minutes until my family arrived. The clock had always been my enemy at home, stealing my sleep in the morning when all I wanted to do was hide under the blanket. I couldn't wait to tell my family that I'd finally made friends with the clock. And for the first time in my life, I was waking up early. Every morning, I waited eagerly for 7 a.m. when friends like Yama, who worked at the hospital, and nurses from the children's hospital would come and help me pass the hours. When I could see well enough, they brought me a DVD player and a stack of DVDs. During my first days, they had turned on the TV for me. I watched the BBC for a few minutes, and they were talking about the American elections between President Barack Obama and that other man. And then they changed the channel to MasterChef, which I had watched back in Pakistan. But my vision was still so blurry that I asked them to turn it off and didn't ask to watch TV again. But now my eyesight was better. Although I was still seeing double a bit, I got to choose from Bend It Like Beckham, High School Musical, Hannah Montana, and Shrek. I chose Shrek. I loved it so much, I watched the sequel right after. One of the nurses figured out that if she covered my damaged eye with a cotton patch, my double vision wasn't as bad. Meanwhile, my left ear kept bleeding and my head kept throbbing, but I passed the day with a green ogre and a talking donkey while I waited for my parents to come from England. On the 5th day, the tube in my throat was removed and I got my voice back. It was around this time that I put my hand on my tummy and felt something odd. There was a hard lump just under the skin. What is this? I asked one of the nurses. It's the top of your skull, she said. I was sure I'd misunderstood. Between my bad hearing and my trouble with words, I thought she'd said the top of my skull was in my tummy. Dr. Fiona arrived to explain. When the bullet hit my temple, it fractured the bone, sending splinters of bone into the lining of my brain. The shock caused my brain to swell. So the doctors in Pakistan removed a piece of my skull to allow the brain to expand. To keep the bone safe, they placed it under the skin of my abdomen. I had lots of questions for Dr. Fiona. It was like being back in biology class at school. I want to know exactly how they removed my skull. With a saw, Dr. Fiona replied. What happened after that, I asked. Dr. Fiona explained that the surgery has been successful, but that I had developed an infection and that my condition had started to worsen. My kidneys and lungs began to fail, and soon I was near death. So the doctors put me in a coma. That way, I could fly to England for better care. You flew in a private jet, she said. A private jet? How do you know? I asked. Because I was on the flight with you, she said. I later learned that the United Arab Emirates had offered the plane, which was fully equipped with an onboard medical unit. Dr. Fiona explained that she and Dr. Javid had been in Pakistan advising army doctors on how to set up a liver transplant system. Dr. Javid was contracted for his advice, and he brought Dr. Fiona with him since she was a specialist in children's emergency care. She admitted that she had been a little nervous about flying into Peshawar because it had become dangerous for foreigners. But when she found out I was a campaigner for girls' rights, she came. She and Dr. Javid told the doctors in Pakistan that I wouldn't survive unless I was moved to a better equipped hospital. So my parents agreed to let me go with them. Dr. Fiona and Dr. Javid had been by my side for nearly 2 weeks. No wonder they behaved as if they'd known me forever. Dr. Fiona had to go take care of other patients, children who were sicker than I was. but I had one last question. I was in a coma, I said. For how long? A week. I had missed a week of my life, and in that time, I'd been shot. I had an operation, had nearly died, and had been flown to the other side of the world. The first time I'd ever flown out of Pakistan was on a private jet to save my life. The world had gone on all around me, and I knew nothing about it. I wondered what else I had missed out on. So that ends on 149. So chapter 28, we are all here now. And that starts on page 150. Okay.
Let's go.
When the tube in my throat was removed, I had had another call from my father, one where I could actually speak. He had said he would be by my side in 2 days, but 2 days turned into 2 more. Dr. Javid arranged a third call to Pakistan. My father promised that the whole family would be there soon. Just one more day. Please bring my school bag, I begged.
I'll probably put a poll up if you want it to be.
Sorry. I begged. Exams are coming up. I thought I'd be home in no time and would get back to competing for first in class. The next day, my 10th day in the hospital, I was moved from the ICU to another room. This one had a window. I had expected Birmingham to look like cities I'd seen on television, like New York City, with tall buildings and cars and traffic, men dressed in business suits on the street, and women walking on the streets as well. But when I looked out, all I saw was a sky, the color of an old tea kettle, rainy and gray. Down below were houses, neat and uniform, calm and organized. I couldn't imagine a country where every house was the same, a country where there seemed to be no sun. Where were the mountains, the waterfalls? Later that day, Dr. Javid told me my parents were coming. I didn't believe it until he tilted up my bed so I would be sitting to greet them when they arrived. It had been 16 days since I'd run out of my house in Mingora, shouting goodbye on my way to school. In that time, I had been in 4 hospitals, first in Mingora, then in Peshawar, then in Rawalpindi, and finally here in Birmingham, and traveled thousands of miles. I'd met wonderful doctors and nurses and other hospital workers. I had not cried once, not when the nurses removed my staples in my head, not when their needles pricked my skin, not when the light was like a dagger in my eyes. But when the door opened and I heard familiar voices saying Yani and Pisho, and when everyone fell upon me, weeping and kissing my hands because they were afraid to touch me, finally I cried. I cried and cried and cried some more. Oh, how I cried. And for the first time in my life, I was even happy to see those annoying little brothers of mine. Finally, after 16 of the most frightening days of our lives, we were all together again. After we all stopped crying, we took a minute to have a good look at one another. I was shocked at how old and tired my poor parents looked. We were exhausted from the long flight from Pakistan. But that wasn't all. Suddenly, I saw that they had some gray hairs and wrinkles. Had they always had them, or had this ordeal aged them somehow? I could tell they were shocked by how I looked too. They tried to hide it, but I could see the concern in their eyes. They touched me cautiously as if I might break. And who could blame them? I knew from looking in the mirror that half my face was not working. The swelling had gone down, but my left eye bulged. Half my hair was gone and my mouth drooped to one side. Meanwhile, I had been so pleased to have my voice back that I hadn't realized that I had still been able to speak only in simple baby sentences as if I were 3 years old. It wasn't until I saw the surprised expression on Atal's face that I realized how strange I must have sounded. I tried to smile to reassure them. Don't worry, I wanted to say. The old Malala is still in here. But when I smiled, a shadow darkened my mother's face. I thought I was grinning, but my parents saw something that looked like an awkward, crooked frown. Abba, who were all those people? I asked. He understood what I was asking. I wanted to know from him who had done this to me. Yanni, don't ask these questions. Everything is fine. We are all here now. Then he asked me how I was feeling, if the headaches had gone away. I knew he was trying to change the subject, and although I wanted him to answer my question, I let him. My father, my proud Poshtan father, was not himself. It was almost as if he had been shot as well. He seemed to be in physical pain. When we were alone one day, he grasped my hand. Yanni, he said, I would take every scar you have, every minute of suffering if I could. His eyes filled with tears. They threatened me many times. You have taken my bullet. It should have been me. And then he said, people experience both joy and suffering in their lives. Now you've had all the suffering at once, and the rest of your life will be filled only with joy. He could not go on. But he didn't need to say another word. I knew he was suffering too. He had never doubted the righteousness of our cause, but that cause had taken his daughter to the brink of death. How unjust the world can be sometimes. Here I was, a girl who had spoken to cameras from around the world, but my poor injured brain couldn't come up with the words for the person I loved more than anyone else. I'm not suffering, Abba, I longed to tell him. You need not suffer either. I smiled my crooked smile and said simply, Abba. My father smiled back through teary eyes. I knew that he knew exactly what I was thinking. We didn't need words. We had shared every step of the journey that had somehow brought us to this hospital room, and we would share every step going forward. A little while later, my mother joined us. I had just started taking small steps, but I still needed someone to help me in the bathroom. Since that first day, my mother had tried not to stare at my face, but as she guided me to the bathroom, I noticed she stole a look at my reflection in the mirror. Our eyes met for a moment, then she looked away. Then came a whisper. Your face, she said. Will it get better? I told her what the doctors had told me. I would have to undergo several surgeries and months of physical therapy, but my face would eventually improve. But it would never quite be the same as before. When she walked me back to my bed, I looked at my parents. It's my face, I said, and I accept it now. I said gently, you must accept it too. There was so much more I wanted to say to them. I had had time to get used to my new face, but it was a shock to them. I wanted them to know I didn't care how I looked. Me, who had spent hours fussing with my hair and fretting about my height. When you see death, I wanted to say, things change. It didn't matter if I couldn't blink or smile. It was still me, Malala. My face, it doesn't matter, I said. God has given me a new life. My recovery was a blessing, a gift from God and from all the people who had cared for me and prayed for me. And I was at peace. But while I was in Birmingham watching Shrek and his talking donkey, my poor parents had been thousands of miles away, enduring their own terrible pain. I had been healing while they had been suffering. From that day on, our family began to heal together. Okay, so chapter 29, filling in the blanks. And this is page 156. The next few days were spent with my parents filling me in on what had happened in our 16 days between the shooting and our reunion. What I learned was this. As soon as the bus driver, Usman Bajan, realized what had happened, he drove me straight to SWAT Central Hospital. The other girls were screaming and crying. I was lying on Moniva's lap, bleeding. My father was at a meeting of the Association of Private Schools and had just gone on stage to give a speech. When he finished and learned what had happened, he rushed off to the hospital. He found me inside, lying on a stretcher, a bandage over my head, my eyes closed, my hair spread out. My daughter, you are my brave girl, my beautiful daughter, he said to me over and over, as if saying it could awaken me. I think somehow I did know he was there. even though I was not conscious. The doctors told him that the bullet had not gone near my brain and that the injury wasn't serious. Soon, the Army took charge, and by 3 o'clock, I was in an ambulance on the way to a helicopter that would take me to another hospital in Peshawar. There was no time to wait for my mother, so Madame Miriam, who had arrived at the hospital soon after my father, insisted on coming in case I needed a woman's help. My mother had initially been told I was shot in the foot. Then she was told I was shot in the brain. Neighbors had flocked to our house in tears when they heard the news. "Don't cry," my mother had said, "pray." As the helicopter flew over our street, she rushed up to the roof. And as she watched it fly by, knowing I was inside, my mother took her scarf off her head, a rare gesture for a Pashtun woman, and lifted it up to the sky, holding it in both hands as if it were an offering. "God, I entrust her to you," she said. Poor Atal had found out about the shooting when he turned on TV after school, and he realized that if he hadn't had a tantrum about riding on the tailboard, he would have been on that bus too. Within hours after the shooting, Pakistani TV channels ran footage of me with prayers and poems. As this was happening, I was arriving at the Combined Military Hospital in Peshawar, where the neurosurgeon named Colonel Junaid examined me and discovered something surprising. The bullet was still inside me. He soon discovered that what the doctors in SWAT told my father was incorrect. The bullet had, in fact, gone very close to my brain. He informed my parents that my brain was swelling and that he would need to remove part of my skull to give it space to expand. "We need to operate now to give her a chance," he said. His superiors were being told I should be sent abroad immediately. But Colonel Junaid stuck with his decision, and it was a decision that saved my life. My mother prayed throughout the 5-hour operation. As soon as she began, she felt a calm come over her. From then on, she knew that I would be all right. But 2 days after I was shot, my condition was getting worse. My father was so convinced I would die that he started thinking about my funeral. He tried not to think about the past and whether he had been wrong to encourage me to speak out in campaign. 2 British doctors happened to be in nearby Rawalpindi, and the Army brought them in to consult. They were Dr. Fiona and Dr. Javid, and they were the next to save my life. Dr. Fiona and Dr. Javid said that if I had stayed in Peshawar, I would suffer brain damage or I would die. The quality of care concerned them. They thought I was at risk for an infection. Even though she was due to fly back to Birmingham, Dr. Fiona stayed on and arranged to have me airlifted to another Army hospital, this one in Rawalpindi. Security was tight at this new hospital because of the possibility of another Taliban attack. My family was kept in a military hostel near the hospital and had little access to news from the outside world since the hostel had no internet connection. They did not yet realize that my story had traveled all around the world and that people were calling for me to be sent abroad for treatment. It was only when a kindly cook from a hostel brought them some newspapers that my parents found out that the whole world knew about my shooting. My parents were rarely consulted on what should happen to me when my condition became grave. There was no time. All decisions were made by the Army. Dr. Fiona insisted that I be treated overseas for best care. Eventually, it was decided that I would go to Dr. Javid's own hospital in Birmingham, Queen Elizabeth Hospital. But I needed to be moved within 48 hours, 72 at most. My mother and my brothers had no passports or documentations, though, so the Army told my father he would have to travel alone with me. He was in an impossible situation. If he left the country with me, he'd be leaving his wife and sons in Rawalpindi, possibly at risk of attack. So he made a choice. "What has happened to my daughter has happened," he told Dr. Javid. "Now she is in God's hands. I must stay with the rest of my family." Dr. Javid reassured him that I would be taken care of. "Isn't it a miracle you all happened to be here when Malala was shot?" my father said. "It is my belief God sends the solution first and the problem later," replied Dr. Javid. My father then signed a document making Dr. Fiona my legal guardian for the trip to UK. He was in tears as he handed over my passport. Although I don't remember it, my parents said goodbye to me at 11 p.m. on the 14th of October. It was the last time they saw me in Pakistan, and they wouldn't see me again for 11 days. My father did not want me to wake up in a strange country without my family there. He was worried about how confused I would be, how abandoned I might feel, but he assumed their passports and visas were being processed and they would join me in a matter of days. He had no idea that a government official delayed their departure to join me because he wanted to fly with them. The wait felt endless. It was during the earliest days in Peshawar, amid the horror and grief, that my father asked my mother, "Is this my fault?" "No, Kaista," she replied. "You didn't send Malala out thieving or killing or committing crimes. It was a noble cause. You should not blame yourself. But the ones who should feel shame are the Taliban for shooting a child and the government for not protecting her." By the time the Taliban issued a statement saying they shot me because my campaign was an obscenity, they said they had used 2 local Swati men who had collected information about me and my route to school and had deliberately carried out the attack near an army checkpoint to show they could strike anywhere. Their trademark was to kill by shots to the head. Shazia and Kainat, the 2 other girls who'd been shot that day, were also recovering. Kainat's arm had been grazed by a bullet, and Shazia had been hit in the palm and left collarbone. 2 bullets, 3 wounds. I'd missed so much. And yet, as my parents told me everything that had transpired while I was in a coma or in my windowless hospital room, it was almost as if they were telling me a story about someone else. It felt as if these things had happened to some other girl, not me. Perhaps that's because I do not remember a thing about the shooting, not one single thing. The doctors and nurses offered a complicated explanations for why I didn't recall the attack. They said the brain protects us from memories that are too painful to remember. Or they say my brain may have shut down as soon as I was injured. I love science, and I love nothing more than asking question upon question to figure out the way things work. But I don't need science to figure out why I don't remember the attack. I know why. God is kind to me. People don't understand when I say this. I suppose unless you have been close to death, you cannot understand. But death and I have been very close, and death, it seems, did not want me. Apparently, many people had tried to visit me, journalists, celebrities, and a number of politicians, but the hospital kept them away so I could heal in private. One day, an important minister from Pakistan came and met with my father. He said that the government had turned the country upside down to find the man who shot me. My father held his tongue, but he knew this was empty talk. He had never even found the person who had killed Benazir Bhutto. Only one person was in jail after the shooting, our poor, dear bus driver. The army said they were holding him so they could identify the gunman. But why had they arrested our bus driver and not the gunman? It was madness. The minister also asked my father if I could give a smile to the nation. He did not know this was the one thing I could not do. My father was unhappy, but again, he held his tongue. My father, who had dared to talk back to the Taliban, was learning that sometimes saying nothing speaks just as loudly. When I finally watched the news, I learned that a spokesman for the Fazula said the Taliban had been forced to shoot me because I would not stop speaking out against them. They had warned me, they told the press, but I wouldn't stop. My other crimes? I spoke for education and peace. In their terms, I was speaking for Western education, which was against Islam, in their opinion. The Taliban would try again to kill me, Fazula said. Let this be a lesson. It was a lesson indeed. My mother was right when she quoted from the Holy Quran. Falsehood has to die, she told me all those years ago when I was considering doing the blog for BBC. And truth has come forward. Truth will always triumph over falsehood. This is the true Islamic belief that has guided us on our journey. The Taliban shot me to try and silence me. Instead, the whole world was listening to my message now. So that ends on 163.